Thanks for joining us today. To start things off, would you introduce yourself to everyone?
My name is Shunki Egawa, and I'm turning 27. I'm a musician.
I'm Seon Tanaka. I'm currently 19 years old, and I am a fashion model for a living and a student.
I'm Alicia, and I'm somewhere in my 20s. And I'm currently a PhD student.
So we brought you all in today because you're considered hafu. Before we start things off, would you explain what hafu means?
Well, half is a term used in Japan that describes someone who is half Japanese and half another country. So my other half is from Bahamas. I was born and raised in Bahamas for 15 years, so I spent basically my whole life there. And then since I'm only 19 now, I've only been here for 4 years from high school.
I'm half Italian, but I was born and raised in the US, so I don't know anything about Italy.
Mine is Korean. I was born and raised in Korea. I stayed there for 20 years.
Wow.
So I actually didn't have that much chances to speak Japanese.
So are you considered a foreigner in here because of your background?
I don't think, because of how I look, they don't really treat me as a foreigner, because they don't really recognize me as a hafu unless I tell them. So but right after I tell them, they kind of treat me as a foreigner kind of bit.
And you?
I would say for me, I'm probably the complete opposite. So at first, people would think that I'm full foreigner, but when I start speaking Japanese, then they would understand that, oh, okay, well, he can speak Japanese, so that means he must be half. And then I get treated more like a Japanese person.
And your family name is Tanaka.
Which is very Japanese.
Yeah.
Every time I go to the doctor's office, because they would call you by your last name, everyone would be stunned because they don't expect me to stand up when they call Tanaka. They might think that I'm Johnson or some other thing.
I know it's a bit too personal question, but how did your parents meet? Do you know about that?
I heard that my mom and dad met in Korea, and my mom translated for him because she spoke Japanese and Korean both.
So my mom was in the entertainment section of a hotel, so she would always have to be moved around to different countries, and then she eventually ended up in Bahamas.
Wow.
Where she met my dad, and then they got along, and they started dating, and then they got married. They got married first, and then a few years down the line, then they had me.
And how about you?
I think my mom and dad met in Hawaii. And my mom was on vacation in Hawaii, and I think my dad was working at the hotel, but they met, I think their groups of friends came together, and I think my dad asked my mom for her. I don't know. I guess not digits, because I don't think they had So I think my mom went back to Japan after her trip to Hawaii, and they wrote letters back and forth. And I think he proposed to her in a letter.
Wow! Goosebumps!
Yeah.
Whoa!
Surprise.
Right? And then she went to Hawaii, they got married, and I was born.
So how did your grandparents reacted to your parents' love?
Hearing from my mom, stories from my mom, she said that she didn't feel very welcomed by my dad's parents, especially my grandma. I guess they were Italians tend to also keep the Italian bloodline as well.
See.
Italian is a very long history, and they tend to have a lot of pride about being Italian. So I think the fact that my dad chose to marry outside of that, it was a little difficult for them to accept. I don't think that they said it directly, but I think my mom just felt isolated a lot of the times. And yeah.
I just heard that my mom's side grandparents, they hated about the marriage because they're Koreans. And Koreans always had this conflict between Japan and Korea. So I heard that they really had a difficult time to get along. So my grandparents, my mom's grandparents, they didn't want to see my parents until they got the first child, which is my older brother. So my older brother was the trigger to get along.
My family inside of Bahamas, they didn't really care that much because they're island people. So they're a big family. My dad is it's like inside of a family of 6. So he has 2 other brothers and 3 sisters. So to the Bahamian people, they were just like, oh, just more family. But to my Japanese side, they heavily disagreed with it. So like around the start, my dad actually received like a blood sign letter from my granddad. So as in like he cut his finger and then like sealed the envelope with his blood and said like, leave my daughter alone. But my dad was just like, oh well, that's okay. my dad didn't even like think twice about it. He was just like, nah, I'm still gonna be with her.
Oh my God.
So there was that.
He's so cool.
Yeah, my dad was just like chill about it. He did because he was just focused on like my mom. So even when he came to Japan a lot of times before their marriage, like my grandparents over here, like they would just not be home at the time that they came. So like my dad and my granddad met each other for the first time at like my dad's marriage, at the marriage. My granddad asked my dad the question, you must hate me so much. Like you must really hate me because you haven't, like I'm always avoiding you and stuff. But my dad responded with, how can I hate someone I've never met, right? So since then they understood like their philosophies, I guess, are like the same. And then they became like best friends. I don't know why. They went from avoiding to like being best friends. And then even until my granddad like passed away, like the last person he wanted to speak to was like my dad because they were just like that close.
Wow,
And
not
that was
his actual daughter?
well, I mean, his daughter was there too, but like, it's just that my dad and him, like, they just like really got along, like just that good.
Well, do you feel like there are more and more half people in Japan?
I think so.
Yeah.
Like I've seen, yeah.
Like the kids,
Yeah.
you see kids.
I've seen a
half
lot
the
of
kids more?
Yeah.
Why do you think like that's happening?
Is it just because like Japanese people actually admires the half
Yeah.
and the half kids
Yeah, the
are
half
really
kids.
cute and like they really expect the half kids to be good looking, cute, pretty.
I also think like more people are coming into Japan too.
That's
So like there's just
true.
like more races, there's more opportunity to meet new people. And I think Japanese people are also venturing outside of Japan more than before. That's my opinion, I don't know. But I think so. So I think there's just like more opportunity to meet different kinds of people, and I think it's also becoming, I think, more accepted, you know, to, you know, have mixed couples and mixed kids, and I think it's just maybe just increasing.
I see. And yeah, like when we turn on the TV in here, we see so many half models, right?
Like you said, like they're on TV and stuff often, but I feel like the half people who are on TV are those pretty, beautiful people. So it's not necessarily that we all half people are beautiful. It's just like Japanese or any other race.
Seriously. No, every time when I tell them that I'm a half, people will be like, oh, what's the reaction supposed to mean? Just kidding, but true though, like they really expect the half people to be good looking or pretty.
True.
And when the person's not actually that pretty or good looking, the people will have a weird reaction about that.
Is there any half hierarchy here in Japan?
It's like a lot of my friends are half Filipino and half Japanese, and they said that they were envious of the fact that I'm half Italian because they feel that they have to hide their Filipino side because they feel that they're not accepted as well in Japan, so they say that they're half Spanish because it sounds better.
It sounds better.
Yeah. So that was kind of like the first time that I had heard something like that, so it's like very possible, like when I hear everyone's stories, that maybe it is like half Caucasian is getting a little bit like, I guess like on TV, and it's more considered maybe like an ideal, which is like a very strange transition for me because in the US, especially where I grew up, it was literally like all Caucasians and then me and my mom. So like we were always kind of like isolated and a little bit discriminated against. In the US, being half Japanese, you're not considered Caucasian. So white privilege was not something that I was experienced. If anything, I was like bullied all the time. Like when I was with my mom, we were ignored in restaurants, you know, like, and I get viewed as completely Asian. Like when I would go to restaurants with my dad, who is white, like I would make sure to say in front of the waitress, Dad, because I didn't want them to think he's on a date with like a young Asian girl. Like that happens a lot. So I always like have to like, white people don't view me as white. if that makes sense. And so like I never felt like a part of like the Italians or like the white people. So like when I came here, like I'm one of you guys, I'm Japanese, and everyone's like, you look white. I'm like, what's happening? Like, like I was like, I don't understand. So,
I feel you.
Yeah.
Because like I mean, in Bahamas it's like the same thing, right? Because even though like I'm pretty dark, but then everyone is like this color. Like not to say as a joke, but it's like people are like pretty dark. But people are actually like pretty black. So like when people see me, they don't treat me as like a Bahamian.
Local.
Yeah, as a local. Like they obviously think like, oh, he's mixed with something, right? And then like some people even just call me like straight like white boy or like Asian boy, you know. Even though I look like this, they're just like Asian boy, you know.
Asian boy makes sense, but
the Asian boy, like it's just like that. Even though I look like this, they can like tell that there's something different.